Hi, folks. This is Harold Ree with the Paw Print Animal Rescue Podcast. Laura Schenone is going to be reading a couple of different passages from her book, The Dogs of Avalon. Just want to let you know that some of the content in Laura's first reading may not be appropriate for young listeners. Thanks, and on to the show.
This is Paw Print, an animal rescue community. Episode 132. I'm Nancy Ree.
And I'm Harold Ree. We're so excited to bring Laura Schenone back on. She was our guest in episode 130, and we bring her back to read not only one, but two different passages from her book, The Dogs of Avalon. Squeezed between her two readings, I'm going to talk a little bit about my adventures being a lazy vegan and the impact it had on my health. You won't want to miss that. We got a lot to talk about in this episode, so let's kick it off with Laura Schenone. Response has been tremendously positive and really looking forward to the launch on Tuesday, August 22nd. How are you feeling?
I'm excited. It's a big deal.
Can you remember what it was like when you launched your first two books?
You know, I had a long span of time between the second and the third, so that was 10 years ago, so it feels like another universe. I mean, we barely had social media at that time, so it was a very different world. I don't remember, actually. Okay. This is all new.
Okay.
So I chose a chapter that is about a third, almost half into the book, and it's called A Burning Donkey, and it takes place in 1987. And, Marion Fitzgibbon, who is at the center of my story by now, has started an animal rescue organization. She has not yet become the chairperson of the ISPCA, but she's really going strong and is a network of women. And her home phone has become sort of the animal rescue hotline for the city of Limerick. So when we find her now, she's getting a call as usual and running off. So throughout the book, there is a tension between her always leaving to take care of animals and her family. She has 4 children. So I'll leave it there and read now. The phone call came at night, as so many calls did, puncturing the dinner hour, the homework time, and the flicker of the television shows they like to watch. Marion's children learned at the earliest ages that humans did bad things, especially at night. This was hardly a revelation, as all children know and fear this truth. But to grow up and personally witness the pain of burning skin, crushed bones, and starvation day after day, well, this was a deeper kind of knowing. Marion answered the call as she always did, as though she'd been expecting it. Where exactly? It was always one of the first things she asked because so many people hung up too quickly. Childers Road? If the children had been listening, if John hadn't been watching television, they might have noticed that something in her tone was different from the usual. Burning? Did you say a donkey is burning? Keys, shoes, purse. John asking if she really had to go. Couldn't it wait until the morning? But of course she had to go now. Be careful, Marion. Yes, of course. He didn't need to know where she was going. She just said goodbye, as though it was one of the regular emergency calls. The slam of the front door, the sound of our car starting and then heading off, engine fading into the distance, quiet, more quiet. The family had learned to tolerate it and tune it out as best as they could. She'd been like this for more than a dozen years. Perhaps it was temporary and would end at some point. Perhaps someone else's mother or wife would take over. On the ride there, Marion rehearsed her outrage. How could you let this happen? A burning animal? There can be no excuse for this. None. The site belonged to the Riley family, if belonged was what you'd call this collection of caravans and animals and cooking pots, clotheslines and garbage sprawled out on a section of grass, which was mostly mud. Belonged, in that the Rileys maintained a steady presence in these fields at the edge of a busy road. When they went off on their journeys, someone stayed behind to watch the site. They always returned to this spot. No one was bothering about the land yet. That wouldn't come until many years later when the developers came to build. For now, the Rileys were, more or less, left alone. When Marion was a girl, people called them tinkers or gypsies. They lived in wagons painted in bright colors and roamed the countryside. Their chief trade was tinsmithing, but they also bred and sold horses and dogs, and they picked crops and peddled goods. She could remember them at the door asking her mother if she needed her knives sharpened, or had any odd jobs, and whether they could fill their water jugs. Otherwise, they kept their distance from settled people. At night, they sat around their cooking fires telling stories and drinking near the caravans. Marion had been picking up animals for 15 years, and so her work overlapped a great deal with the travelers. She got calls about their horses. She wound up with their cast-off dogs, most of which had problems like mange, ticks, fleas, worms, and ear mites. They couldn't afford vets and were horrendous at animal care. When a dog was sick with a virus, they'd separate it from the others so as not to spread disease and bad luck, staking it in a field, which meant they'd tie the dog to a tree or a post and leave him behind to starve. Or they'd just dump the animal somewhere so as to lose it. This upset the settled people greatly, and many saw it as evidence of their criminal natures. Marion had made it a point to befriend the travelers in her own neighborhood. They were the McCarthy clan, and when they came to her front door, she gave them food and clothes and paid them to do small jobs. The itinerants was how John referred to them. Must you bring these itinerants here? But Marion saw these interactions as an opportunity. Can I give you some worm pills for your dogs? Do you have shoes on all your horses? Here, take this or that. Thank you, missus. I'll say a prayer for ye. Now Marion pulled her car off the highway. All was quiet, except for the sound of wind and the whiz of cars. An abandoned circle of coals glowed up ahead. It was bone cold, the wind blowing hard. A few lurchers ran about, heads low, quietly whimpering from cold or hunger and scratching themselves, probably because of mange. She made a mental note to come back with medicine and show the travelers how to treat it. Like most travelers, this clan had long ago given up horse-drawn wagons and now used recreational campers hitched to cars, vehicles invented for vacations when middle-class people wanted to leave civilization behind. A large silhouette came into view. It was a donkey, in a heap beside the embers. Its back to the remains of fire. She hesitated a moment, then collected herself and rushed in. The flesh on its back was charred and smoldering. The big glassy eyes were frozen. She put a hand on its thick, bristled neck. He was gone. The smell of singed hair and meat and death lingered about. Only the donkey's back was burned, but he was so emaciated and sickly that the fire had easily finished him off. She bent down and peered under the vehicles. Sure enough, a couple of dogs had curled themselves into tight balls on scraps of cardboard and carpet. Another note to herself, those rugs and paper had to be burned to get rid of the mange. Oh, enough already. After a few moments, the door cracked open, and a woman's face peered out in alarm. Sorry to bother you at night, but we got a call about this burning donkey. Do you know what happened? The woman could have been anywhere from 20 to 40 years old. It was usually hard to tell a traveler's age. The girls married as teenagers, then had so many children, so one after the next, so that they aged quickly and looked old beyond their years very soon. The woman looked out at the corpse and shook her head. 'Twas an accident. Such a cold night, the donkey got too close to the flames trying to warm himself. Nobody saw it until it was too late. We'd all gone inside. As the woman spoke, the door opened inch by inch to reveal numerous children huddled behind her. At least 6 or 8 of them. Marion was struggling to keep count. They ranged in age from 2 to 12 years old and looked to be of another world because the public health nurse had evidently visited that day to treat scabies or some other parasites and shaved each child's head, then painted each scalp with white medicine. Marion had to steady herself as all those faces looked out at her, eyes enormous, to see what was going on. So as not to stare back, she glanced down and happened to see their bare feet on the dirty floor. How cold they must be. A 2-burner cook stove glowed from the kitchen, red rings turned on for heat. It was all they had. Those many bodies must sleep on top of one another in 2 rooms of the caravan to stay warm. Oh, the bottom is very low, Marion thought. The bottom was here, right here. Had the public health nurse told the mother that the scabies or whatever it was would only come back unless the dogs were treated and the sheets cleaned? How could the mother do it if she had no running water? And how could this mother even think about animals or scabies or running water when the children were so cold and clearly needed food? Marion, who never lacked for words, now faltered. Where would you begin? Those were the only words that came to her. Where would you begin? She could manage merely to say good night, and then she went home. For days after her visit to the camp on Childers Road, Marion was haunted by that mother and her children. Images of their bald head and bare feet and their big eyes kept coming back to her. No heat, no lights, no toilet, no water. Each time it shook her, and she felt ashamed. Oh, how sanctimonious she had been, how righteous with the little animal care lectures to the travelers at her door. She had known nothing. But after the night of the burning donkey, Marion decided that rather than wait until the animals were left by the roadside and injured, sometimes beyond healing, she should try to get them sooner. Suddenly it seemed obvious. She needed to go to the travelers' camps and offer knowledge of animal care directly to them. She needed to help.
Thank you so much.
That is a harrowing, that's probably the most harrowing part of the book. And I want to say that the entire book is not like that. There are many fun escapades and lighter pieces. But that was, for me, one of the reasons why I wrote the book when Marion told me that story.
Whenever you did visit Ireland, what type of interaction, if any, did you have with the travelers?
Oh, it's interesting you should say that. I was very interested in going to the travelers camp. And the first time I visited, Marion was taking me back from the airport. She was bringing me to where I was going to stay. And I said to her, at some point I'd like to go to the travelers camp if you don't mind. And she said, let's go now. And she drove right there and we got out. And I met them. They were very reserved, but what was so interesting to me was to see their relationship with Marion. There's a very big line between travelers and settled people. I was told when people found out I'd been in a travelers camp, they couldn't believe it. But the travelers and Marion had a strong relationship. They trusted her and she had helped them. And then some years later, I went back. I actually was there several times talking to them. They were very open to me because I was with Marion, of course. And then, after a while, it seems like it might be exotic or going to a foreign country or, really going to a different culture, which it is. But if you've ever been in projects in the United States or with struggling people, so much is the same.
Thanks to Laura for a wonderful reading. Laura will be sharing another reading at the end of this episode. Wanted to share with you a letter I received. Actually, it's test results that I received about a month ago. Just shows my total cholesterol at 194 milligrams, below the recommended 239. My triglycerides below 164 milligrams, well below the 499 count. My HDL cholesterol up at 50 milligrams above the 40 recommended. And my LDL cholesterol at 111, well below the 159 recommended. Now, why am I mentioning this? It's because I probably haven't had readings like this in years. And I've taken statins, those medicines that help to raise the good cholesterol, lower the bad cholesterol, and do some other things for a variety, for one main reason. I develop muscle soreness if I take too many statins or if I take too high of a dosage of statins, which is not a healthy condition if you develop muscle soreness. So because of that condition, I've had to take very low dosages of statins, which, as you might imagine, don't really help that much. So about 10 months ago, this is about October, just around Halloween of 2016, I decided to go vegan. And in fact, I'll call it this way. I decided to go lazy vegan, and I'll describe that in a little bit more detail. The reasons for going vegan are several. One is really, as I just described, my health. I've been taking blood tests, I'd say once, twice a year. And every time the doctors have noted, yeah, your cholesterol is a little bit too high. All those numbers I just read to you, those are not my normal numbers. I was usually well over 200 in just total cholesterol. My HDL was kind of in a good range. My LDL cholesterol was definitely not in a good range. And my triglycerides they weren't quite off the chart, but they were really high. And I've done a lot of different things. I mean, there was at one point where I was running a lot of half marathons, so exercise didn't really help that much. I have tried to reduce my meat intake, whether it's red meat, pork, bacon, chicken, fish. I've tried to reduce it, but I decided to just go full forward, plant-powered vegan, which, if you don't know, vegan essentially means it's more than just vegetarian. You're taking out all animal products, which includes dairy, such as cheese, butter, milk, yogurt, also removing eggs of any kind. And that includes if they're in a processed product or if they're in a pastry, avoiding those foods altogether. So the first question that I used to always ask of folks who were either vegetarian or vegan is, how do you get protein? And what I've learned, even being a quote unquote lazy vegan, it's actually not that difficult to really fill yourself up with protein. You just have to know which sources to go to. Other reasons why I decided to go vegan, I mean, health was probably the biggest one. But really, secondly, is because of this podcast. I was just doing a quick count, and I think in our 132 episodes, about 12 or 13 of our guests are vegan. And when I mean are vegan, they didn't even necessarily say that they were vegan on the episode. I maybe found out later on, either through their Facebook page or maybe reading their bio. We have had folks who have been longtime vegans, Mark Dillon and Colleen Patrick Goudreau, long time vegans. We're going to have other guests in the next few weeks who are also longtime vegans. But it definitely wasn't anything that when Nancy and I started this podcast, we were thinking we're going to interview a lot of vegans. And in fact, 12 to 13 guests out of 132, it's not a huge percentage. It's maybe a little under 10%. But when I compare that to my own personal life, whether it's coworkers, family, friends, it's a way higher percentage as far as people I've met through the podcast who are vegan versus people in my day-to-day life. So being a lazy vegan and getting all your nutrition, what's that all about? So I was really trying to figure out, how do I become a vegan, but at the same time, not radically change the lifestyle of Nancy as well as our teenage son, both of whom are not vegan. And I didn't want to make it where I was cooking, slaving away in the kitchen 1 to 2 hours a night, making dinner or, making lunch for the next day. I was trying to figure out ways to keep it simple. Now, I know some of you may not be into this, but I was definitely relying heavily on either some prepackaged foods and definitely relying on the microwave. What that allowed me to do is just buy stuff, stick it in the refrigerator or the freezer. When I was ready to eat, I either had to pop it in the microwave, stick it in the toaster oven, maybe quickly pan fried in a pan, but something that was easy enough to fit into the typical busy lifestyle, as well as get all the protein that you need and really just have a balanced diet. So what I figured was, what protein sources out there made the most sense for me. And what I ended up relying on, and not exclusively, but a lot, were things like bean burritos, lentil soup, split pea soup, kind of those legumes. I would have salads. I would have green smoothies, and that's where you blend greens. It's basically salad in a blender, essentially. You might take regular green leaf lettuce. You could take spinach. You can take kale. You can go Swiss chard or watercress, all these different really great sources of protein. You could even stick, broccoli in there if you really chose. But, balanced that out. I got my bean burritos, I got my lentil soup, I got my salads, I have my green smoothies, other things I would do. And this definitely goes in part. I mean, I would have, I wouldn't call it junk food, but definitely veggie burgers. And I got these Dr. McDougall miso ramen cups. And so definitely a good nighttime snack. Yes, it is not necessarily the ideal meal, but it also goes to show you that even without the ideal nutritional diet or without the ideal diet, I could still lower my cholesterol, anywhere from 25 to 50 to 75 points. Pretty incredible. I wasn't just a rabbit eating fruits and vegetables all day long. I would have my mix of processed foods and foods that maybe didn't have the ideal nutrition, but that was okay. As long as I was avoiding animal products, that was sort of my key criteria to make sure that I changed my diet and hopefully see some positive effects, which 8 months later, I did see some positive effects. In fact, some really positive effects. Now, this didn't come without some consequences, some negative consequences. One was the first couple months, and this was October, November, December. So imagine that it's through Thanksgiving season. If you remember, Nancy, our son, and I, we went to Costa Rica during Christmas. So whether it was, holidays with our family, my mom and dad, traveling to Costa Rica, I wasn't really feeling great. I was transitioning from a omnivore diet to more of a plant-based diet, and I wasn't feeling amazing. Whereas some folks will tell you, hey, I turned vegan and I felt terrific from the very first week. Well, I wasn't in that boat. I wasn't even close to that. I started feeling kind of sick, just not really quite myself. I would even tell Nancy, maybe this is not working out. So when we came back from Costa Rica at the end of December, I decided to change things up just so slightly. I started taking a multivitamin to address whether it was B12 deficiency, which is something that is common amongst vegans. So I took a multivitamin. I also, with the suggestion of Allison Melody, who is one of our future guests, she's a co-host of the Food Heals podcast, which is a terrific podcast, in part about veganism, but just about healthy living in a busy world. That's the theme that Allison and her co-host Susie Hardy try to tackle every episode. She recommended a probiotic pill, which I took, or which I do take daily, sometimes twice a day. So multivitamin, probiotic pill. I, even for my shoulder, which I injured about three years ago in a bike crash, I take glucosamine and chondroitin to make sure that my shoulder is kind of to make sure that my shoulder has all the building blocks to stay as healthy as possible. And I even take a calcium D3, vitamin D3 supplement, which it's basically because in past tests, I've tested a little bit deficient in vitamin D. The calcium actually is to help not only me, but to help Nancy, to just make sure that we don't suffer down the road from osteoporosis and other bone deficiencies. So with my lazy vegan diet and those supplements, I kind of started to feel a little bit better. And I lost a little bit of weight at the beginning, although this was not meant to be weight loss inducing. I did lose a little bit of weight, although in the past 2.5 months, I've done more workouts. I've been working out a lot more. I joined an Orange Theory fitness club, if you want to call it that, which has actually caused me to gain some weight. Not too much, but gain a little bit of weight as my body sort of recovers from those workouts. And so all this I've been doing for 8 months. About a month ago, finally went to go see a doctor, and I said, hey, can I get a blood test? She ordered the blood panels. I took the blood test, and voila, a week later, I found the results, and strikingly more positive than I ever thought I would be able to achieve. So with that said, I guess I'm going to have to stick with this vegan diet. And I'm not a scientist. I don't know why veganism necessarily causes in myself my cholesterol levels to drop and the HDL, the good cholesterol levels to rise. But it does, and it works for me. I have not really, myself, I haven't really studied. I haven't watched a lot of those films. The only film that I even came close, or that I watched that is somewhat against sort of this factory farming would be Food Inc. I did watch that film. Gosh, this must have been 10 years ago. But when you think about other films that a lot of vegans will encourage folks to watch, Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives, all that, I haven't watched any of those films. I haven't read too many books, I don't think. I've definitely not read the China Study, which is one that a lot of vegans will propose that you take a look at, among other books. And so really, once again, lazy vegan. I didn't have a cookbook to guide me. I didn't necessarily have that one person to guide me. I would get little tips here and there, maybe from a podcast, maybe from a coworker who is vegetarian or vegan. I might read a little article here and there. But really, other than that, it was essentially just making sure I stayed disciplined as far as cutting out any animal products. And even with that said, I got these results with what I would call some cross-contamination. Examples might be Nancy and our son finishes a huge meal, but there's like 3 bites left of something that contains some meat or might contain butter or eggs. Well, instead of just chucking it, I would just say, okay, I'll eat that. And while it wasn't often, I would say it might be once or twice a month. It just didn't make a lot of sense to store it. So I would just eat it. And even with the fact that I did eat some animal products as a result of living with 2 people who do continue to eat animal products, I was still able to achieve this lower cholesterol count, which is, to me, pretty amazing. This is not going to be a regular part of this podcast. Maybe in 6 months, I'll take another blood test and I'll let you know how things go with that. If any of you do have any questions, you can always email us at thisispawprint@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, hit me up on Instagram, Twitter. I can share a little bit more about how I was able to achieve some really good cholesterol numbers being a quote-unquote lazy vegan. Now here's Laura with the final reading from her book, The Dogs of Avalon.
Well, there was this one story Marion told me that really was touching to me about a dog named Lucky. And it came out of her work with the travelers camps and the travelers. So let me read that now. It's quite short. Marion's regular visits to the camp were also noticed by the children there. One day she found a traveler child standing at her front door. He had a dog with him, baling twine around the neck for a collar and leash. "Mrs., can you find my dog a good home?" He was about 10 or 11 years old. The dog was a shepherd mix, perhaps part collie, missing half an ear. He wagged and sniffed and wagged some more. "His name is Lucky," the boy said, looking at Marion seriously. He was clearly upset, but trying not to show it. "Why are you giving him away?" Marion knew the family. It was not a good situation. After the boy's father threw the mother out a window, she'd fled for the women's shelter and hadn't come back. It took a little while for her to get the story. The boy's father wanted to lose Lucky. Twice he threw the dog out of the back of a van and threw rocks at him. But both times Lucky came back. The traveler boy was worried about what steps might come next. Marion said, "I'll bring him to a home where he'll be safe and happy." The boy nodded, then bent down to say goodbye to his dog. Marion stepped aside to give them a moment. Then only Lucky remained. Marion made good on her word and found Lucky a home at a healing center of all places. It was a hippie kind of place in County Roscommon, where the owner had faith in the therapeutic power of dogs. Food, open space to run, a soft bed, lots of attention, all the amenities a dog could want. In exchange, Lucky's job was to greet with open-hearted acceptance and charm all the arriving guests, helping them forget their problems and their pain. He was well suited to the task and lived up to his name.
That's it from us, folks. we just want to say thank you to Laura Schenone for reading those 2 beautiful passages. Her book, The Dogs of Avalon, goes on sale Tuesday, August 22nd. I highly recommend this book. You can learn more about Laura's book on our show notes at thisispawprint.com/132. I'll also give some extra tips on my lazy vegan journey. If you'd like to listen to more episodes of Paw Print, you can find us on your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Make sure to type in Paw Print Animal Rescue and hit the subscribe button to get the latest episodes immediately. You can find me or Nancy on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Type in This Is Paw Print, all one word. All the music you hear on Paw Print is produced, composed, and performed by Luke Gartner-Brereton. Find him at info.vanillagroovemedia.com. Thanks so much for sharing Paw Print with your friends and family. We're already at 132 episodes, and we couldn't have done it without your support, so thanks. And remember, you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time on Paw Print.
Is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.